The subconscious records in two ways: repeated information and repeated imaginations. Now we will explain these, and you will see how you can create a transformation in your subconscious. So I want you to listen carefully, because soon a real change will begin. To understand how your subconscious works, let's go through a simple example. Try to remember a book you read in the past. Let's think about Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Did you read it? Now, how much of this book do you remember? Most likely, very little or nothing at all. Because if information comes only once or twice, the conscious mind stores it in temporary memory, but does not make it permanent. To better understand this process, I want you to imagine two boxes. The first box is temporary memory. Incoming information is placed here and later forgotten. If we remembered everything, I guess life would be unbearable. The second box is permanent memory. This is like a deep well, and it keeps the information placed in it for a long time. So how does the transition from temporary to permanent memory happen? There is only one way: repetition. When information is repeated continuously, the subconscious starts to consider it important and makes it permanent. If information comes only once, it is likely to be forgotten. But if this information is combined with intense emotion or strong pain, it can even be recorded in the subconscious in a single instance. We have already touched on this process a little. However, this is a rare situation and is not under our control. We will talk about information that is somewhat under our control. For example, let's consider another case. Think about learning to drive. The first time we sit behind the wheel, everything requires conscious effort. Gas, brake, mirrors, gears. We do all of this while thinking. But if we leave this process there, that is, try it once and stop, we forget. However, as it is repeated, this information becomes permanent and your subconscious takes over. You no longer think while pressing the gas pedal. You do not think about clutch adjustments, because your subconscious has turned this into an automatic behavior. This is exactly how repeated information settles into the subconscious and becomes a reflex. To understand the power of repeated information, I will share two historical examples. The first is the story of Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. Mehmed the Conqueror is the sultan who closed one era, opened a new one, and conquered Istanbul, which was said to be unconquerable. Many people tried before him but failed, because it was believed to be impossible to overcome those walls. In fact, it had become a legend. The walls of Constantinople can never be breached. But Mehmed the Conqueror was raised believing from childhood that he would conquer Istanbul. The education, the teachers, and everyone around him supported this belief. This idea was told to him repeatedly and was imprinted in his subconscious. He was absolutely certain that he could conquer Istanbul. His mind was programmed for conquest, and in the end, he changed the course of world history. This was not just a military achievement, but also a product of a system of thought. Mehmed the Conqueror was not only equipped with war strategies, but also with intellectual knowledge. He could speak many languages and read books. He was interested in philosophy and science. For example, here's a fine detail. If Greek philosophy is so widespread in the world today, it's because of Mehmed the Conqueror. Because when it was almost forgotten, many Greek philosophy books were translated into Arabic. Thanks to Arabic, They spread again and reached Europe from Arabic translations. Let's not miss this point. So let's not see him just as a warrior. Anyway, when the conquest was completed, the first thing he wanted to see in Istanbul was a library. This story gives us one of the best examples of how repeated information in the subconscious can turn into a system of belief and produce great results. The second example is the story of Thomas Edison. Edison is usually associated with the light bulb, but he is actually an inventor with many different inventions. His childhood story is quite interesting. One day, he received a letter from school to give to his mother. He went home and gave the letter to his mother. She opened and read it. Turning to Edison, she said, "Son, you are very intelligent. They thought they couldn't provide you with appropriate education at this school because you are not at the same level as the other students here. They asked me to take you home so I could educate you better." Edison believed what his mother said. From that day on, he saw himself as highly intelligent and shaped his entire life with this belief, becoming an inventor who went down in history. Years later, when Edison's mother passed away and went through old letters in a drawer, she found this letter and read it. In reality, the letter said, "Your son has intellectual disability. He cannot continue at our school. Please send him to another educational institution." What changed Edison's life was what his mother told him that day. Because this thought was told to him repeatedly, he was educated this way every day, and it was engraved in his subconscious, and years later he became someone who left many inventions to the world. Keep these two examples in mind. Repeated information in the subconscious shapes a person's life. The second important factor is imagination. Imagination, visualization, fantasy, what we know as the power of imagining. You can record something in your subconscious not only by repeating it with words, but also by visualizing it, because the subconscious is more affected by images than words. When I was young, I used to go to author interviews and ask myself, will I ever sign a book? Will people stand in line for me too? Then, as I learned how the subconscious works, I turned this into a goal and constantly brought it before my eyes. As a result, of course, there are many more details that I will tell you about. Today, I have reached the places I wanted. Let's be thankful. My signing days lasted for hours, but it did not happen by itself. I want to say this. It was not a coincidence. It was a result of programming my subconscious. Therefore, I repeat, you can become anything you want, but it is very important to proceed step by step. Do not forget the two keys of the subconscious: repetition and imagination. Imagining is one of the most powerful tools to reprogram your subconscious. Because the subconscious cannot distinguish reality from imagination. If you imagine something strongly enough, the subconscious perceives it as real and starts acting accordingly. At this point, let me remind you of something else. Seeing is also imagining. If you see successful people around you and spend time with them, the subconscious perceives their success as real and puts you in a similar state. That is why you should pay attention not only to the words you tell yourself, but also to the images you are exposed to. When you understand how your subconscious works, you will realize that you have the power to change your life. To understand how strong the subconscious's reaction to imagination can be, let's consider a simple example. For instance, a person who is afraid of snakes also becomes scared when seeing a snake on TV. But how does this happen? After all, they know it is just a screen, they know there is no snake in the room, yet they are still afraid. This shows that the subconscious's response to imagination is much stronger than logic. I have observed an example closely. A relative of mine had an extreme fear of snakes, not just the animal itself, but even the word. When he saw a snake on TV, he would look away. He even avoided conversations in which the word snake appeared. When I told him we could do some work on this, even the idea that the topic would be discussed made him uncomfortable. He refused to do the exercise. I did not force him, because there is something important to remember. A person cannot be changed unless they decide to change themselves. When we try to convince the subconscious with logic, we are often mistaken. That is nonsense. Saying the snake is not here means nothing to the subconscious, because the subconscious cannot distinguish between imagination and reality. That is why, for example, when we watch someone cut their wrist with a knife on TV, we shiver, right? Consciously, we know it is fiction, but the subconscious reacts physically to what it observes.
To understand this effect, let's do a simple imagination exercise. For instance, now close your eyes. Have you closed them? Imagine holding a juicy lemon cut in half in your hand. You take the lemon in your hand, you open your mouth and squeeze the juice into your mouth. All that juice flows into your mouth. The sour taste spreads over your tongue. Now, open your eyes. If you imagined this vividly, you may have noticed that your salivation increased. This shows that something you imagine can cause a real physical reaction in your body. This is how the subconscious works, so never underestimate the power of imagination. Another example comes from a study I conducted on exam stress. I even made a video about this on YouTube. Just check the comments of people who repeatedly listened to the recording, repeatedly visualized what was described. Search exam stress Hakan Menguch. All of them wrote their experiences below. Why do I say this? We said that the subconscious believes repeated information and stories. That's why I emphasize these points. When repeated information is also repeated through imagination, what happens? It programs our subconscious. Sometimes people ask, is it really that simple? Will I change just by imagining? But the key is not doing it once. Anyone can imagine something once. What matters is repetition and embedding it into the subconscious. Consistency is what is important. The subconscious accepts repeated thoughts and imaginations as real. To see how this works in society, we can also look at reactions to television series. For years, there was a character named Tejavuz Jujoshkun in old Turkish films. If you watched his interviews, how many people had beaten him? People know he is an actor, yet the subconscious perceives it as real. Logic may know he is not real, but the subconscious processes it differently. Let's consider another example to understand how a fear is coded in the subconscious: fear of darkness. Darkness is something that almost everyone is uneasy with to some degree. For some, it creates only mild discomfort. For others, it can become a serious phobia. We are not born afraid of darkness. However, in childhood, our parents might say things to protect us, like, "Don't go there, there are monsters," giving us information, a suggestion. This suggestion enters the subconscious for the first time. Then, one day, we try to go into a dark place again, and our parents repeat the warning. With repetition, the fear begins to take hold. Later, when we are alone in the dark, we feel uneasy, and the subconscious reinforces this information. For instance, if a bug bites you in the dark or you fall, you have a bad experience. It strengthens the fear. Additionally, television and movies feed this fear. In horror movies, darkness is always shown as frightening. Monsters or ghosts emerge through the darkness. All these elements, when repeatedly processed in the subconscious, make darkness a threat for the subconscious. If you have a fear of darkness, I recommend experiencing a dialogue in the dark exercise to overcome it. This exists at the Gayrettepe metro station in Istanbul. A blind guide leads you through complete darkness. But note, you have never encountered such darkness before. It is an incredible experience. I went several times. I even took some of my clients and traveling companions watching us from Europe. In Hamburg, this is actually called First Dialogue in the Dark. I highly recommend that you experience it. Whether you're afraid of the dark or not, it has another philosophy. I recommend it. Let's summarize this part. What did we say about the subconscious? It perceives repeated information and imaginations as real. A fear or belief is formed only through repetition and imagination. To reprogram your subconscious, we need to use these two elements. If there's something you want to change in your life, the first step is to repeatedly expose yourself to it and write a new code in your subconscious. The power of repeated information and repeated imagination is used most effectively in movies. By the way, they also set trends with movies. People were told that whatever they consumed, they would be cool. They were taught that whatever they wore, they would be beautiful. Cinema is one of the most effective ways to shape a person's subconscious. Seeing matters, because we have also seen examples of this in history. For example, in Nazi Germany, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, used cinema to direct the German people toward a specific thought system. Convincing all of Germany of one idea was not easy. Do you know what they did before cinema? Goebbels, by definition, the propaganda minister, distributed radios to all homes. First, with radio, they engraved repeated information before going visual. Then, in cinema, they constantly conveyed the ideas they wanted to instill. You know the rest. So this does not happen because someone suddenly speaks. It is the result of planned work. The same principle applies to our subconscious. One of the principles of the subconscious is it does not distinguish between right or wrong, logical or illogical. If information is repeated continuously, the subconscious accepts it as true and eventually turns it into belief. Most people underestimate this. If I enter an environment, nothing will happen. It won't affect me, they think, but they are wrong. If a specific thought is repeatedly exposed to you in an environment, sooner or later, you will adopt these thoughts. I have observed this repeatedly. I have seen people who were previously not interested in certain things start doing them, even things they would never have done before. 7 or 8 years ago, I gave a seminar for an association fighting against drugs and listened to the stories there personally. Almost 99% said, "I would never do it," but entered such peer groups. They said, "I would never do it," and later spent years trying to recover. The subconscious does not ask whether this information is suitable for me or harmful. It takes repeated information, codes it into the subconscious, and eventually even shapes our conscious decisions. You can think of it like soil. Soil does not question the seed thrown into it. Will this be a harmful fungus or a beautiful flower? If properly cared for, the seed grows. The subconscious is the same. If information is repeated, it takes root in the subconscious. That's why you must carefully choose the information and environment you are exposed to. What do you watch? Who do you spend time with? Which thoughts do you repeatedly expose yourself to? By analyzing these, you can see how you shape your subconscious. For example, years ago, I conducted a study to see the effect of subconscious techniques on athletes. Because this is a bit my style. When I receive information, I want to both apply it to myself and others. I worked with a karate athlete, Mustafa Alimji. Mustafa Alimji became Turkey's first karate world champion. He brought the first karate world championship to Turkey. You can even check with the Karate Federation under his name, Mustafa Alimji. Later, I did not focus specifically on athletes, but I know that once there is evidence, I believe it even more, and I know it will work. Some of you among my traveling companions may specialize in this and help bring the achievements that our country deserves. Let's continue. Some people may think these repeated affirmations are trivial. I am logical. It won't affect my subconscious, they think, and they are mistaken. But the real determinant is the subconscious. I emphasize this repeatedly because the subconscious receives 400 billion pieces of information per second, but only 2,000 reach our conscious mind. That is, the subconscious gathers information on the scale of a massive city, but we only see a single building. So which 2,000 pieces do we notice? This depends entirely on our subconscious programming. The subconscious selects what information we receive according to our beliefs and the codes we acquired in the past. For example, consider a person who looks at life negatively. Even if such a person listens to the most beautiful project in the world, they only notice the negative aspects. You show them a magnificent house, but their eyes focus only on a small stain on the ceiling. Because the subconscious is programmed to only see the negative. Milana has a very beautiful saying about this. If your window facing outward is dirty, my flowers will appear as mud to you. If your subconscious is programmed to see negativity, you can't notice even the most beautiful things in your life. Conversely, if you equip your subconscious with positive and strong codes, you will begin to notice the beauties in your life more. For example, years ago, I conducted a study to see the effect of subconscious techniques on athletes. Because this is a bit my style. When I receive information, I want to both apply it to myself and others. I worked with a karate athlete, Mustafa Alimji. Mustafa Alimji became Turkey's first karate world champion. He brought the first karate world championship to Turkey. You can even check with the Karate Federation under his name. Later, I did not focus specifically on athletes, but I know that once there is evidence, I believe it even more and I know it will work. Some of you among my traveling companions may specialize in this and help bring the achievements that our country deserves. Let's continue. Some people may think these repeated affirmations are trivial. I am logical. It won't affect my subconscious, they think, and they are mistaken. But the real determinant is the subconscious. I emphasize this repeatedly because the subconscious receives 400 billion pieces of information per second, but only 2,000 reach our conscious mind. That is, the subconscious gathers information on the scale of a massive city, but we only see a single building. So which 2,000 pieces do we notice? This depends entirely on our subconscious programming. The subconscious selects what information we receive according to our beliefs and the codes we acquired in the past. For example, consider a person who looks at life negatively. Even if such a person listens to the most beautiful project in the world, they only notice the negative aspects. You show them a magnificent house, but their eyes focus only on a small stain on the ceiling, because the subconscious is programmed to only see the negative. Milana has a very beautiful saying about this. If your window facing outward is dirty, my flowers will appear as mud to you. If your subconscious is programmed to see negativity, you can't notice even the most beautiful things in your life. Conversely, if you equip your subconscious with positive and strong codes, you will begin to notice the beauties in your life more.